Find their seats. All right, I will begin. Good evening. My name is Elizabeth Kamens, and I am the current president of 3GNY. On behalf of 3GNY, thank you for joining us this evening for our annual Yom HaShoah Evening of Remembrance. On this day of remembrance and reflection, it is both comforting and inspiring to be surrounded by our community, including both new and familiar faces. To those who are streaming our service virtually, welcome to you and thank you for joining. We are so glad you can be with us this evening, wherever you are located. Tonight, we gather as a community to remember and honor the 6 million Jews who perished during the Holocaust. At 3GNY, we take our role as descendants of survivors very seriously. We believe that in our role as descendants, we have inherited a responsibility to ensure the lessons and legacies of the Holocaust are never forgotten. Whenever I hear my fellow 3G descendants speak of their grandparent stories of survival, I am awed and struck by the small miracles that aligned to make that story of survival possible. One brave choice, one act of kindness from a stranger. We are here today largely because of all of those small miracles. We must continue to ask ourselves, what can we learn from the survivors that stood strong in the face of impossible hardship, and how do we honor their memory? What can we learn from those that perished, those that did not have a chance to leave behind their stories? If we held a minute of silence for each of the 6 million individuals, we would be silent for over 11 years. And that would be if we were continuously holding moments of silence, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. 6 million can never be just a number. Each of those 6 million were individuals who had a life, family, and dreams of their own. At 3GNY, we recognize our unique position as the last living link to those that survived the atrocities of the Holocaust. How do we carry forward the legacies, memories, and testimonies that many of us were the last to personally hear firsthand? How do we honor those that did not survive? We do so by continuing to share the stories and preserving their voices and memory. And we ensure that we never stop sharing. The importance of this can't be overstated. We know better than anyone what happens with unchecked anti-Semitism. Every year we comment on the horrific rise in anti-Semitism in our society, and this year is no different. Thus, the importance of our duties to speak out against injustice and inform others of the facts and the truth remains as important and urgent as ever. To stand up against injustice and to share truth and understanding. In doing so, we honor the memory of the 6 million and the profound resilience of those who survived. Tonight, we join together, honoring and remembering those who came before us and reaffirming our responsibility as descendants. As a community, we will vow to never forget and to each do our part so that never again is not a promise, but a mandate. Thank you.
As many of us have learned through our involvement in 3GNY and our experiences within our own families, as we cling to the voices of the last living Holocaust survivors, it is time for the next generation to assume the responsibility for keeping the memory of the Holocaust alive. For the 4th time, 3GNY's Yom HaShoah Evening of Remembrance will consist of various passages, personal reflections, and prayers guided by the Hitkansut Haggadah. Originally developed by the Shalom Hartman Institute, but adapted and updated to best reflect the spirit of 3GNY. The Hitkansut Haggadah and ritual, like the Passover Seder, follows a prescribed order that takes us on a journey from sitting in grief to rising up to insist on human dignity. Much like the Passover Seder, the Hitkansut only comes alive in the hands of those who participate in the ritual and bring their own memories and voices to the table. Through this ritual, we are remembering together in a personal, participatory, and transformative way. listening to the voices of the past while drawing on our own memories, associations, and understandings in the present. There are 6 steps that we take as we gather and experience the Hitkansut Seder. Enter, remember, lament, confront, honor, and reflect. Each of the 6 sections of the Seder builds upon the others, with a narrative that takes us from the responsibility to remember to the commitment to remember responsibly. At the start of each section, we will light a candle over here to represent the beginning of each section, and eventually end with 6 lit candles. These candles not only reflect the journey that we are taking tonight, but the 6 million Jews that were murdered in the Holocaust. Hitkansut is a Hebrew word that resists direct translation. It means not only to gather together, but also to turn inward in reflection. Today, honoring the memory of the millions of Jews who were murdered and recognizing the courage of Jewish resistance carries new layers of meaning. In this spirit, we invite you to both come together as a community and to reflect inwardly as we confront the ongoing challenges of remembering both past and present suffering. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Dave Rekas. I have the privilege of serving as Executive Director of 3GNY. And the first section of our ceremony tonight is Enter. We're grateful that you're all here with us tonight, and we're honored to invite you into this special gathering. The goal of the Hitkansut ritual is to create a space for all of us to be together, to remember together, and to participate by sharing our own personal and collective memories. In 2002, Yad Vashem hosted an international conference about the legacy of Holocaust survivors. At the conference's concluding ceremony, Tzvi Gil, a survivor himself, read from what is now known as the Survivors' Declaration. Quote, "The age of the Holocaust survivors is drawing to a close. Before long, no one will be able to say, 'I was there, I saw, I remember what happened.' All that will be left will be the books of research and literature, pictures and films, and archives of testimonies. This will be a new era. The dark inheritance of the Shoah that was so indelibly stamped on the survivors' souls and hearts will become a historical mission and responsibility imposed upon humanity to fill with content and substance." End quote. We gather here tonight still, thankfully, in the age of survivors. And yet we know that that door will soon be closing. Our presence here is, in many ways, an answer to the survivors' call, a promise that we will not allow their memories and experiences to fade into history. But what's more, we are living proof that the survivors' declaration missed something critical. Yes, this new era will be filled with the books and research, films, and archives that they leave behind. But they also leave a living legacy, full of memories, stories, laughter, traditions, and love. We are the legacy and the mission that survivors leave behind. 3GNY at its core is a community dedicated to embracing our collective responsibility to remember. As we begin our Yom HaShoah ceremony tonight, this first section, Enter, sets the tone for our gathering as welcoming to all, inviting all of us to take our place as living legacies, honoring Holocaust memory with dignity and purpose. We invite you here in New York and those on Zoom to enter into this ritual space tonight together with an open mind and an open heart.
We were not there. We did not experience or suffer it, and yet we take upon ourselves the responsibility to remember, the commitment to remember responsibly. Even if I have no words and you have few, whether we are far away or near, whether we are close kin of theirs or distant, we assemble a place within ourselves, among ourselves, a meeting place, a convergence of memories. We're present now.
Never shall I forget that night, the first night in camp that turned my life into one long night, 7 times sealed. Never shall I forget that smoke. Never shall I forget the small faces of the children whose bodies I saw transformed into smoke under a silent sky. Never shall I forget those flames that consumed my faith forever. Never shall I forget the nocturnal silence that deprived me for all eternity of the desire to live. Never shall I forget those moments that murdered my God and my soul and turned my dreams to ashes. Never shall I forget those things, even were I condemned to live as long as God himself. Never. Now let us all say together the voices of those who remember on page 11. Let us remember the generations who remembered, in all the Jewish communities who held prayers, gatherings, and memorials throughout the depths of the Shoah and at the end of the war in displaced persons camps and transit camps, in the land of Israel and in the diasporas. The tradition of remembering continues to this very day. We are a link in the chain.
We begin our remembrance tonight by honoring the dignity of the lives of Jews before the war. We choose not to focus solely on the destruction that followed, but to appreciate and celebrate the dignity, beauty, complexity, and creativity of Jewish life and culture. The lives we remember span countries and continents, vocations and social class, and a range of religious and secular identities. Collectively, we will recall our ancestors, their places of origin, languages, songs, and stories from the past, and we celebrate the vibrancy of Jewish life in Europe before the Shoah. As we enter this moment of tonight's Yom HaShoah Remembrance and the Remember section of the Hitkansut, I want to begin not with loss, but with life. I am the granddaughter of 2 Holocaust survivors. My father's parents, Ben and Lori Weintraub, survived the Shoah, but tonight I want to focus on my grandma Lori, whose story I tell in classrooms through 3GNY, and the world that she came from before everything changed. My grandma was born, Lori Evelyn Simberg, on August 25, 1928, in the small town of Brüchen in East Prussia. She had the kind of childhood full of small joys that, in hindsight, feel so fragile and so precious. Her family would travel to the nearby city of Luck for the Jewish holidays to visit her grandparents. In fact, I have a photograph of my grandma hanging out of the window of a train with her father as they made the journey to Luck, the pure joy on her face visible and palpable. Her father's parents owned a department store in Luck, and my grandma remembered those visits vividly. Time with extended family, the feeling of being welcomed by them, and, as a child, the excitement of beautiful clothes and toys. In Brüchen itself, there were very few Jewish families, and yet my grandma didn't grow up defined by separation. She remembered her friendships. She and the non-Jewish children in this small town were always playing together, the divides of religions seemingly invisible. There was no sense in those early years that my grandma did not belong exactly where she was. She was simply a child among other children, moving through the everyday rhythms of school and play and home. When I think about that time, I try to hold on to what it means, that Jewish life in Europe before the war was not only survival or suffering waiting to happen. It was lives being lived to their fullest. It was living and working with family and special holiday visits to grandparents. It was toys and friendships and shared streets. It was children simply being children. This is the part of my grandma's story that I want to bring into the room with us tonight. Because before everything that came after this, the fear, the loss, the violence, and the destruction, there was a world where Jewish life was ordinary, rooted, vibrant, and alive. A world where my grandma was not yet a survivor, but simply a little girl named Lori, growing up in Brüchen with her mom, her dad, her community, and the steady flow of everyday life. And it's that world that we remember tonight.
As we remember the tapestry of Jewish life before the war, I'd like to invite Dan Nadel to share a song that may have been heard in the shtetls, towns, and cities where our grandparents and our ancestors lived. While listening to the music, I invite you to think about the sounds, sights, songs, and stories that created the rich textures of life before the war. Following the song, we'll continue with readings on page 17 in our program booklet.
And these too I shall remember. The barefoot dream path like lightning, a joyful flash through the map of my nostalgic sleep. The quiet road that brought us together. All the countries, streets, houses into one scared awake Jew street with its warm stones, its moldy wood and somber bricks, accepting my light feet. The spice shops, the kasha and flour stores, the herring stands, the kerosene vendors, the soapy barbershops, the toupee and wig makers, the almonds, dates, and figs, the freshly baked sour bread, the poppy seed and onion rolls, the dark tea rooms with drowsing black worms on their warm fireplace, the meager pastures, the sleepy half-alive graveyards, forever watching over the frightened life.
These things I remember. I remember the fathers and the mothers, women, men, and children, speakers of all languages and dialects, who built their lives over hundreds of years, lives of faith and commandments, lives of Torah study, lives of poetry and tradition, lives of song and festive meals, lives of mutual responsibility and aid, lives of finance and work, lives of science and art, lives of societal improvement, lives of creatureliness and creativity, lives of prayer for Zion. We remember their lives. They are the pillars of our existence.
We all come here tonight with a variety of stories, with memories, with images of where our families come from. And so in just a moment, I'm going to ask you and invite you to turn to a neighbor, maybe someone that you don't know very well, and to take a minute to introduce yourself. And I want to encourage you to share a bit about where your family comes from. If you know what their homes looked like, what jobs they had, how they observed Jewish holidays, or any other memory of life before the war. Or if you're not a descendant of Holocaust survivors, from wherever your ancestors left their homelands at whatever time to come to the United States. Share that with your neighbor. To those of you on Zoom, please share your memories in the chat. We'll take a few minutes to turn inward, to turn to each other, share a bit about where your family is from and what you know about that before I call us back together as a group. Go ahead. I love hearing the chatter of people sharing stories, sharing memories, talking about families. I am going to ask that you wrap up your conversation and turn your attention back up here. And to know that after our ceremony, we will have time to continue the conversations together. It's always the dangerous part when you bring a room full of Jewish people with stories who want to talk, and you let them loose. How do we bring it all back together? So I am going to ask that we come back together and we will read together on page 24 with those memories, with those stories, with the new people that you just met in your minds and in your hearts. On page 24, all together, I will remember. I will remember the Jews in their diasporas, in their communities from east to west, in Europe, on the shores of the Mediterranean, and throughout the Middle East, those who were destroyed or displaced, and I will remember the Jewish communities that stood beside their brethren in the days of destruction. Thank you.
Now, as we light the third candle, lament, we move from appreciating the vibrancy of the Jewish life that was before the war to mourning its destruction. We consider the magnitude of what was destroyed, the unfathomable loss of life, and the destruction of our families and communities and our culture. How does that city sit solitary, she that once was so full of people? Tonight, we lament the destruction of European Jewry, its scale, its savagery, and its silence, of a civilization that took 1,000 years to build and less than a decade to eviscerate. Let us lament the erasure of the largest center of Jewish life in human history, of a people that not only persisted, but flourished in the face of centuries of forced conversions, blood libels, expulsions, and pogroms, and then suddenly reduced to ash. Let us lament the mathematics of a catastrophe that are too great to bear. 6 million lives in total, 1/3 of world Jewry. In Poland, 3 million Jewish lives extinguished, over 90% of its Jewish population. Over 1 million Soviet Jews erased, 200,000 Jews from the Baltic states, 260,000 from Czechoslovakia, 280,000 from Romania, 100,000 from the Netherlands, every single one of them murdered. 65,000 Austrian Jews, 25,000 Belgian Jews, 75,000 French Jews, all disappeared from the earth. 165,000 German Jews murdered. In Hungary, 565,000 Jews murdered in less than a year. Over 400,000 over the course of a single 8-week period in the spring of 1944, including my Saba's family. The last time he saw them alive, before they were transported to Auschwitz from the Matzelt-Zakazak ghetto, his sister forced upon him a solemn vow, a demand that he survive, that he live, that he serve as a Zeicher for unser Mishpacha, as a remembrance for our family. It was a vow that he would faithfully fulfill by surviving, by building, by living, as the only member of his family to survive the Holocaust, one out of all of them. One of only 4 people that remained from all the Jewish families in the town of Pitplesha. Echa esa levadi tarchachem. How can I bear alone your burden? and it was a vow he would fulfill even in his death. At Mount Moriah Cemetery in Fairview, New Jersey, on the spot where my Saba Chaim Indig was laid to rest, stands a tombstone that bears not only his own name, but those of his family members, those who were robbed not only of a life, but also of a place to rest in death. His brothers, Yitzchak Yaakov, Mordechai Meir, Asher Zelig, and Zev Yechiel Mechel. His sisters, Sheva and Chana. His two nieces, both named for his mother, Fega, and his two nephews, Yehuda and Mordechai. Tonight, for them, I mourn, I pray, I lament. I light this candle in their names because they cannot.
Please follow along on page 26. For all these things I weep. Even if I have no words and you have few, our reach falling short and our language stammering, we awaken the memory of an ocean of indescribable torments, mankind's most enormous slaughter, with the very muteness of our lips and with a sadness that transcends language. For these things I weep. For the parents who were murdered, for the brothers, the sisters, for the children who dreamed. For these things I weep. For the house that was destroyed, for the neighbors who betrayed, for the street from which they were driven, for the synagogues that were shattered, for the whole nation whose life was crushed. For these things I weep. For each person, their world, and their mystery. For their loves, their despairs, and their dreams. For their study, their deeds, and their pains. For their memories, their anger, and their laughter. For each person and their life.
We are all here to remember, to honor those who were unjustly murdered simply for being Jewish, as well as those who survived the unthinkable. Honoring the names of those we have lost allows us to honor each individual life, to affirm the dignity each of them carried as a human being. I'd now like to invite you to bring those names into our gathering. And so we'll take just a moment for you to turn once again to the neighbors that you've now met and to share the names of your family members who you are remembering tonight. Those of you on Zoom, please invite you to put their names in the chat, and we'll take just a moment to turn and share the names of the people who you would like to call into this space with us tonight. Thank you. In honor of all those we've lost, in honor of those we've lost whose precise dates and places of death are known, along with those whose murders remain unknown and unknowable, we will now recite the Holocaust Kaddish together. This reading uses a call and response format, with Rebecca leading the Aramaic words of the traditional Kaddish, interspersed by Alyssa leading our response with the names of concentration camps and killing sites from the Shoah. Please rise if you are able and join us in this prayer.
Yitkadal,
Lodz,
V'yiskadash,
Gers,
Shemei Rabbah,
Warsaw,
B'alma Divrach Yerusei,
Bogdan Volga,
B'yamlich Malchusei,
Ravensbrook,
V'chayechon v'yomechon,
Vilna,
v'chayei d'chol beis Yisrael,
Treblinka,
v'aglav uzman karev,
Chalmno,
v'imru amen. Yehei shmei rabba mevarach leolam v'olmei maya, yitbarach v'yishtabach,
Balzac,
v'yitba'ar v'yitramam,
Buchenwald,
v'yitnaseh v'yithadar,
Sobibar,
v'yitalev v'yithalal,
Majdanek,
shmei d'kudsha brichu,
Mannhausen,
Leila,
Babiar,
Michal berchasa v'shirasa,
Bergen-Belsen,
tushbechasa v'nechmasa,
Dachau,
damiran b'yama,
Auschwitz,
v'yemru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'yemru amen. Oseh shalom b'mramav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'yemru amen.
Gone are in Poland those little Jewish towns. Lubiechów, Karczew, Brody, Walenica. You look for candlelight in the windows and for song in the wooden synagogues in vain. Vanished the last leftovers, Jewish tatters. Blood was buried by sand, traces were cleared, and walls were lucidly whitened by galoshes lime. Just like after a plague or for a big holiday. Here glitters one moon, cold, pale, alien, already out of town, on the street, when night lights up. My Jewish relatives, poetic boys, will not find 2 golden moons of Chagall. The moons are now above other planet. They flew away frightened by grim silence. Gone now are those little towns where the shoemaker was a poet, the watchmaker a philosopher, the barber a troubadour. Gone now are those little towns where the wind joined biblical songs with Polish tunes and Slavic rule, where old Jews in orchards in the shade cherry trees lamented for the holy walls of Jerusalem. Gone now are those little towns, they went away by shadow, and the shadow will fall between our words, until we'll come closer brotherly and we'll join again the 2 nations fed by centuries of suffering.
Rise again if you're able.
אל מלא רחמים, שוכן במרומים, אמצא מנוחה נכונה תחת כנפי השכינה. במעלות קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר הרקיע, מזהירים את נשמות כל אחינו בית ישראל שנטבחו בשואה. אנשים, נשים וטף, שנחנקו ושנשרפו ושנהרגו, שמסרו את נפשם על קידוש השם. בגן עדן תהא מנוחתם. אנא בעל הרחמים, הסתירם בסתר כנפיך לעולמים, וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמותיהם. אדוני הוא נחלתם, וינוחו בשלום על משכבותיהם, ונאמר אמן.
In our despair, we look to confront, to recognize and call out the evil that humans are capable of perpetrating, that the Nazis and their allies committed during the Shoah. We also must confront the evils, different and yet familiar, that we are witnessing in our world today. We must not obsess over evil, but to recognize that as humans, we have an obligation to identify it and to take action against it. Evil is such a loaded word. We often associate it with villains and stories about superheroes, but we should recognize that evil represents thought and behaviors that can take on many forms. Through 3GNY's Wedu program, I speak to communities about my grandmother, Elizabeth Blyman, and her experiences during the Holocaust. Within the Hungarian Jewish ghetto and in concentration camps Auschwitz and Stutthof, she saw and experienced both cruelty and indifference towards her family, and other Jews. She was brutally separated from her parents in the selection lines, beaten, starved, and abandoned by the Russian soldiers who let them know they were free during the death marches. She tried to go back to her home in Hungary, but was not welcomed there. Her house was occupied by others, all of her family's belongings were missing, and the lovely garden in her backyard had gaping holes where people had tried to see if treasures had been buried before her family had been deported. She went back to Germany and stayed in a DP camp where she had trouble relating to survivors, many who were Polish and spoke Yiddish, a language unfamiliar to her. She came to the United States and suffered the indignities of being an immigrant with an accent, and told how lucky she was to be here and to work hard to become a useful American. My grandmother at 104 is still a cheerful person who always answers the question, "How are you?" with, "Well, I'm still here." But the suffering she experienced, as did so many others who survived and didn't survive, never really goes away. The fear never goes away. The feeling you always have to be a little extra careful about what you say and who you trust. I am so tired of being afraid. I am tired of apologizing for who I am. And I do confront. I do reject the idea that I just have to go along with the wave of ignorance about Jewish history, Israel, anti-Semitism, and the ignorance that when you neglect to include Jewish symbols, Jewish music, Jewish artists in public activities, when you continue to stereotype us as being rich and miserly and sinister, that you are continuing the trends that led to the Holocaust. We are here. We must act. We must never remain silent or complacent when we see even the whispers of evil coming our way.
A vow. By my eyes that witness slaughter, by my heart that was weighed down by cries for justice, by my compassion that taught me to pardon, until the days came that were too terrible to forgive, I have sworn to remember it all, to remember to forget nothing. Forget not one thing to the last generation, until my indignation shall be extinguished, when the staff of my moral rebuke has struck until exhausted. A vow, lest for nothing shall the night of terror have passed. A vow, lest for nothing shall I return to my want, without having learned anything, even this time.
As many of you know, 3GNY takes seriously our responsibility to share our family stories from the Holocaust with a new generation of witnesses. In doing so, we help the next generation confront the evils of the Holocaust, learn from our family's experiences, and draw inspiration to help them act with courage and compassion today. We are honored to share with you now a few reflections from students, their thoughts, in their own words, about the importance of hearing these stories and confronting Holocaust history today.
Hearing the stories was moving, and it helped me understand not only the unimaginable hardships faced during the Holocaust, but also the incredible strength and resilience people showed in the face of adversity. An 11th grade student.
Thank you for speaking to us. You articulated your grandfather's story in a very engaging and compelling way. I feel like I have a better understanding of the Holocaust events. I was especially touched by the humanity and loss of it that occurred within the camps. Your grandfather's choice to help his friends demonstrated the terrible circumstances and the strength of the Jewish victims. 10th grade student.
Thank you for speaking to our class. I was surprised to hear about your grandfather. From what I had heard, he sounded like an extraordinary human, but I was shocked to see your family's story. It was a privilege and an honor. What I have learned in the past is that you have to share your story to prevent people from doing stuff again. That is why I think it is necessary to learn not just the good, but the ugly parts of history, and I thank you for giving us time to share your story. 10th grade student.
I can't explain my appreciation for your time with me and the rest of the class. It means the world to me, and I will remember it forever. I have never heard anyone have so much bravery, courageousness, and inspiration like Saba, 6th grade student.
Please join me in singing on page 40.
We now light the 5th candle and begin the next section, honor. We are reminded that human beings are also capable of remarkable resilience, compassion, and love. What does it look like to be a person, fully human, in the face of inhumanity? Let us explore together the many ways that individuals and communities responded with compassion and courage, even in the face of personal danger. The human capacity to do evil is met with the human capacity to uphold the human dignity of others. My father's life was saved by a big lie shared by a small village. The village was Escon in the south of France, a rural place of 200 people surrounded by dry, rocky soil. One day, in the middle of the war, the local baker and his wife, Alfred and Louise Marie Aymard, told their neighbors that they were adopting a war orphan, a 4-year-old boy that no one had seen before, with dark, glossy hair. They would be taking him in and raising him as their own. It was a big, fat lie. My father was a Jew from Paris, whose foreign-born father had been swept up into a camp and whose mother had fled to the south of France, where she had given up her children, my dad and his sister, to hide them in a convent. But that convent became too dangerous to hide a little boy. So a heroic 19-year-old nun named Yvonne Ferraud raised her hand, and she risked her life to smuggle my dad to Escon, where her uncle, that baker, promised to care for this little boy. To keep Dad safe, Alfred and Louise Marie told a lie about who and what he was. I don't think a single person believed them. But the people of Escon kept that lie, and they saved my dad's life. My dad wasn't a hidden child in an attic. He lived in the open, fetching water from the town well and going to school with the other children. He called the Aymards marraine and parraine, French for godmother and godfather, and he loved them dearly. Dad stayed with them until after the war, when miraculously his parents survived and came back for him. But my dad was heartbroken to leave marraine and parraine. Nobody in Escon asked to be a hero. They were a village of everyday people, but they understood what was right and had compassion in their hearts. So they made a decision every day, for years, to risk their lives to protect my dad, a strange little boy who appeared one day. I would not be here today if not for their love, and my sweet 6-year-old daughter would not be here today if not for their courage. The villagers of Escon are a living inspiration. They are proof that our humanity can be saved by everyday people. I only hope that my own life can honor theirs.
Choose life. Afterwards, how do we rise? Man and woman, boy and girl, the displaced, the exiled, and the surviving remnant, the heroes of the everyday who created a new life, they all command us to live.
Who is the person? Who is the man who guarded his humanity even when transformed into dust? A father who sent away his daughter to live, a mother who sent away her son, a granddaughter who fought for her grandmother's life, a man who held the hand of a stranger. Who are the woman and the man who took up arms and inscribed new lines in the chronicles of freedom? A man who kept his commandments bound into tefillin, a woman who issued forged papers and who stole across borders. Who are the man and the woman who wrote, painted, told stories, and dreamed? Those who photographed and documented human testimony. The one who laughed and the one who loved, the woman who scribbled recipes to make the hunger subside, and those who shared a slice of bread. Who is the man who lifted the collapse during roll call, the woman who completed the forced labor of her sister, those who shared a word of encouragement, and those who, at twilight, under the shadow of the crematorium pillar of smoke, stood in prayer and song? Who are the children who played and dreamed, and who wrote their poems between the fences, and those who never lost hold of their little hands, even as they walked to their death? Who is the man, the woman, the child, and the elder, who sanctified the image of humankind?
So in just a moment, I'm going to ask you once again to turn to your neighbor for a little sharing. And those of you on Zoom to share in the chat. This time, I invite you to share something that you do to honor your grandparents, your family members, or other victims and survivors of the Shoah. From volunteering with 3GNY's We Do program, to making your grandma's brisket recipe, from giving to charity, or singing your Zadie's favorite song, there are many ways that we honor our family members, our loved ones, the ways that we carry forward our responsibility to remember every day. So take a moment now to share what you do with your neighbor. And after a few moments, I will call us back together to continue. Thank you. We'll ask you to wrap up your conversations as we prepare for the next candle.
For our final chapter of tonight's ceremony, we reflect. After we have mourned the destruction and the loss, after we have told the evil and of standing in opposition to it, let us now ask, what can we learn here and now about how to remember responsibly? What is required of us today as we work to recognize and fight for the infinite value of human life to be honored by all? Just as we are responsible for the memory of those lost and those who suffered during the Shoah, we are responsible for our actions today. When I reflect on my grandmother's story, what strikes me is how profoundly the choices of others shaped her own experience. She was forced into slave labor at a Nazi airplane factory during her time at Sachsenhausen. One day, a German officer walked in and handed her sister a fresh apple. This was an unthinkable luxury for a Jewish prisoner. She said no meal in her life has ever tasted as extraordinary as that very ordinary apple. Another day, a different Nazi walked in and placed a metal pipe in my grandmother's hand. He held a gun to her head and forced her to use the pipe violently against another Jew. Two men living in the same time, at the same place, in the same circumstances. Two entirely different choices, both with lasting consequences for my grandmother's life. We make those choices every day. To be the one to give the apple or the one to give the pipe. We may not always witness the impact, but we are responsible for it. I don't think any of us can really say with certainty what we would have done had we lived through the Holocaust. But my grandmother told me exactly what she did. She sabotaged the wiring of the airplane parts that she was forced to build, a quiet, defiant act of resistance. I often think about what I will one day tell my own grandchildren about the decisions that I made and the actions that I took in the face of hatred and bigotry that we're living through today. That story is still being written, but I already know part of what I'll share with pride, that I stood in rooms like this one and that I was an active member of 3GNY, speaking in schools and communities to inspire action against intolerance, and using our family's past experience to create a better future for us all.
The call. The memory of yesterday is the call of today. I remember that I was exiled and will defend my home, my people, my kin. I will open my door to the stranger, the refugee, the displaced. For my people were the strangers and the pursued. The memory of yesterday is the call of today. For I was the starving one and scavenged for bread. I was the naked one and sought a human face. My people were rounded up and slaughtered, and the world was silenced then. The pain of yesterday is the call of today. I remember and will share my wealth and well-being with those distant and near, the poor of my town and the foreigner. In days of peace and in the tempestuous times, the horrors of yesterday obligate me today. I will guard against evil and its many seductions. I will not let slogans lead me astray, igniting hatred, erasing humanity. The wounds of history warn us today. And when war erupts and again strikes the world, I will not stand idly by. I will not watch from a distance. I will remember that the only actual border runs through the human heart. And the voice that cries out for one people to another, the voice that cries out calls to me. The memory of the Shoah is a call.
Remember me. Something that always struck me was how at the conclusion of my great-grandfather's narratives, he would say, "Remember this and tell your children." I thought about this as I was on FaceTime with my Zaidi while he was on his deathbed. The last time I ever spoke to him was when my whole family called him to say, "Shabbat Shalom." Vividly, I recall his exact words as we were about to hang up. In his old Polish accented voice, he said to my brother and me, "Boys, remember me. Remember me." From that point on, I promised myself I would always remember him. Not the Holocaust survivor, not the miraculous 101-year-old man, but my Zaidi. My Zaidi. His legacies, his stories, and everything he worked for in this country of opportunity. So what is the power of memory? Having the person live on throughout your family's generations. I want my children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren to remember my Zaidi, to tell his stories and pass on his legacy. Remember me.
Good evening again. A very special thank you to the Yom HaShoah Planning Committee for organizing this incredibly moving ceremony. Thank you for your efforts, care, and time spent to make this evening possible. Thank you to all those participants in our service as well, and the moving tributes that were made. Thank you also to Sutton Place for welcoming us into your beautiful sanctuary for the second year in a row. And thank you to everyone who attended this evening in person or virtually on Zoom. However you joined us, thank you for gathering as a community to reflect and honor the 6 million lives lost. Let us continue to embrace our shared responsibility to ensure that every generation knows and remembers the Holocaust. By living meaningful lives ourselves, by speaking out against anti-Semitism, and by sharing the stories of those who came before us, we carry those memories forward to try and build a better world. When we believe in that future, we move forward with the same strength and resilience that carried our people through the darkest of times. We honor the survivors by striving to live as they did, with purpose, with resolve, and with courage. And in doing so, we reaffirm our commitment to remembrance, to responsibility, and to the continuing promise of never again. Thank you again for joining us this evening, and before you leave, there are going to be some refreshments in the back, so please stay and join us. Thank you.